For today's topic, we're going to talk about how much pressure you apply to a piece of paper when you're drawing a portrait. I think most beginners struggle with this question. When I first started drawing 6 or 7 years ago, realistically, I found it very difficult to figure out the right amount of pressure you need on the paper. And to know the answer to this question is very essential to be able to do realistic portraits. When I first started drawing realism about 6 years ago, I used to watch a lot of real-time videos on YouTube, and they gave me the illusion that people are pressing very hard straight up and they weren't really layering. So when I started drawing, I used to try to mimic that, and I always found myself hitting a wall and destroying my drawings. Today I'm going to talk about how you apply pressure properly throughout a drawing. How hard do you press when you're drawing? It depends on the area of the drawing you're working on. Darker values, I typically use a sizable pressure, but not too much that it damages the texture of the paper. Because if you damage the texture of the paper, it makes it more difficult to control your drawings due to the fact that you flatten the texture of the paper. And because of that, it won't allow any more layers onto it. So you need to make sure you keep the texture of the paper, as long as you can, intact. Because that's happened to me before. I've tried to draw a portrait and I've pressed a little bit too hard in an area, flattening the tooth of the paper. And I've tried to come back later to add more layers and it just wouldn't take it. You lose control of that area once you destroy the texture. And for lighter values, I use minimal amount of pressure as possible. Sometimes I just let the pencil touch the paper gently and I use the weight of the pencil and build up the layers that way. And when I mean lighter values, I mean the skin tone areas. Generally, I go very, very light, sometimes barely touching the paper at all. That's the best way to go at it. See, if you went in and did the skin tones, the skin area, and you did that with a heavy hand, so pressing a little bit hard, what'll happen is your portrait will start to look fake and flat because you can't add more layers. The paper just is going to reject it, and you can't get to that level of detail to create like hyperrealistic or photorealistic drawings. So if you use less pressure and take more time to build up your layers, you'll have more control over your drawing in general. And this way makes your drawing more complex and detailed due to the fact that you have that ability to add those multiple layers. And what most people assume when they look at a portrait drawing is that if you make a mistake, you can't undo it. But by going very light on the piece of paper, you can actually remove any mistakes you make because it's only sitting on the top of the paper, the pigment. There's been quite a few drawings where I've made a lot of mistakes, like added the wrong color. I've used a putty eraser and gone through and actually lifted the whole entire layer off the paper. And that's, like I said, due to going very gently on the paper. And the type of paper that you use for your drawing is very critical and will affect the outcome of your drawing. For example, smooth paper generally has a limited amount of layers will go on it. I can't remember what it's called, Bristol board. For me, it has like 2 or 3 layers and that's it. It won't take any more. You don't want something that's way too rough though, because if it's really rough, then it's going to be like sandpaper to your pencils. It's going to take way too many layers and it's going to be almost impossible to get it smooth. You want to find that Goldilocks zone, that texture that's not too smooth and not too rough, right in between. I use Stonehenge paper, 250 GSM, 100% cotton paper. For me, that works. And the paper that I use can take up to like 40 layers if I take my time. I recommend a piece of paper that'll allow you to add at least 10 to 20 layers. With that amount of layers, you'll be able to get the dark values really dark, and that's what you want. It'll help create more contrast and it'll help create more depth if you're able to get those dark values in there. And the other benefit of adding multiple layers to your drawing, it'll give you the ability to create new colors. Let's say if you got to draw a portrait and in that portrait there's a color that you don't have in your colored pencil set. Having a paper that can take multiple layers, like I said before, you can actually amalgamate the different colors together to create that color. It can allow you to achieve that color over time versus one that doesn't take many layers. It's hard to achieve that color straight up. And this is a common occurrence too. I usually do end up mixing colors together to create new colors. If the paper you use only allows 6 layers or less, it's going to put a restriction on you and what you can create. When I'm working with darker values that aren't skin areas, I usually apply more pressure when I'm working on, let's say, the hair and that sort of stuff. The reason for that, because when you use more pressure in certain areas, let's say the clothing or the iris or their eyebrows, it changes the perceived effect of that area. For example, when I'm drawing hair and I go in a little bit harder, not too hard, but when I go in a little bit harder, it creates like sort of a waxy look, and it helps add a element of realism to the hair, versus the skin, because I've gone in soft, will have like a diffused look. That's very hard to explain, but it really does add to it. Now, I want to point out, when most people look at my portraits, they would assume, and correctly so, that they look solid. It looks like I've gone in quite hard over the whole entire area, and that's a correct observation. But that's not due to high pressure in the skin areas. That's due to the fact that what I've done, and I'm re-articulating what I said before, is I've added light layer over light layer over light layer, and what happens over time, they eventually amalgamate, creating a solid thick layer. So it creates the illusion that I've gone in hard, but it's not the case. It's just multiple light layers on top of each other, and that are sort of blended together. Have you ever seen color pencil portraits that look fake or waxy or stiff? And that is usually due to people varnishing way too early. Or it might be an indication that the paper they're using isn't the correct paper for what they want to achieve in their drawings. For example, it might have a little bit too little amount of texture to it. Or the pencils might be crap. I don't actively try and varnish my work, but my drawings may look like I do. And another important element to my drawings, if you have ever seen one of my real-time drawing videos, you'll notice that at the early stages of my layering, you'll see a lot of the white of the paper showing through. How I fix this is I keep my pencil sharp and I manually fill in those areas. So I don't go in and heavy hand, try and draw it out and press the white areas out or add color into them like really hard. I go in and I add a bit of color to those little white areas. So essentially manually filling in the little white spots. It can take a while, but the results are incredibly smooth. I'll go over that again. When I add my first few layers down and I'm adding all my colors, I get my main sort of, let's say the browns, a bit of reds, and I'm adding them in. How I go from that to super smooth is I'll get it to a point, then I'll come in with my main dominant color of the skin tone area, and I'll manually fill in those little white little dots. It takes ages, it does. If you do it properly and you take the time, the end result will shock you. It looks incredibly smooth. I want to mention that there's a YouTube channel called Wonderworlds that made a video about me and my drawings with some excellent information for you guys. The link will be down below in the description bar if you want to go check that out. So that's the end of the video, guys. Thank you for watching. I'm sorry about the short video. If you feel that I haven't hit the video correctly and you want me to articulate this whole subject more or something like that, just let me know and I can do that. Okay, bye.